Hi, Steve Cassidy here. I want to talk today about web application architectures. In particular, I want to contrast traditional architectures with more modern front-end architectures that put more weight on JavaScript applications running in the front end in the browser. So what do we mean by a web application architecture? Trying to draw a bit of a diagram. It's hard to illustrate these things, but in the traditional model that we've been looking at so far in this course, we have a server running our application, and we have a browser that is responsible for displaying the pages that we generate. And the browser runs on the front end on the client's machine on your laptop, while the server runs up in the cloud somewhere on some bit of hardware. Now, the traditional model, the browser makes a HTTP request when we type something into our URL bar in our browser, makes a request to the server. And the server then does some work over here, and this in our case would be a Python application running, and it would receive the request, it will generate the HTML page that is going to be the response, and it sends that back to the browser. And the browser then renders that for the user, and the user can read that and interact with that page. If the user has a further interaction, let's say submitting a form to purchase something or perform a search, they would enter that into the browser here, then where they would send submit the form, send another request to the server. We would do more work on the server to process that request and generate a new HTML page, which we then send back to the browser. The browser renders that page, and the user can then have a look at it. So this is the traditional architecture. This is how the web has worked for a long time. The server is responsible for generating pages and sending them back to the browser. The browser is responsible for rendering those pages so that the user can have a look at them and interact with them and click on links and fill in forms and so on. So this is how we've been generating pages and generating applications. Saying this is a traditional web application. So what's changing? So one of the things that's changing is that the browser on the client's machine is becoming much more capable, has become much more capable. It is now a fairly powerful platform for running complicated bits of software. Software is written in JavaScript. So the JavaScript language is started out as a bit of a novelty of just being able to do clever things like blinking and that kind of stuff in pages, but is now a full-blown application programming language that runs in the browser on the client's desktop. And so because you have that capable programming environment and environment for displaying data and storing data and so on, the browser is now a reasonable place to run a piece of complex code. The server then potentially needs to do less work in doing all this generation of HTML code and can actually concentrate on just serving data. So we get a bit of a different model. Here's my attempt at drawing the difference between the old and the new models. So the browser now, again, when we want to look at a page, we make a request and return, and the server now returns an HTML page. But I've drawn the lines smaller because the page is likely to be a much more lightweight one. And in addition, we're actually going to have JavaScript pages as well, JavaScript as well as the HTML. Okay. We're going to return HTML and we're going to return JavaScript code. And so the browser then renders that, and in rendering that, what it does is to run this JavaScript code. Now the HTML page may not contain all of the data, or it may not in fact contain any data at all that wants to be displayed. And so the JavaScript will then make subsequent requests to the server for little bits of data, and it will get back JSON objects, for example, or XML objects, but JSON is really the predominant format. So we're making multiple requests in to get the content that we're going to display. And then a little later on, when the user interacts with the page, again we send JSON requests off with form data and get back JSON responses and update the page and so on. And so typically here in a modern web application, we only have one main request which the user would see happening for a page. So they would send a request, get a page back, and the page would refresh. and then we will see multiple things happening, and all that happens is that the page updates dynamically as we go, because all of the work is happening behind the scenes. So to illustrate this, so these are sort of two really different architectures for the way the web works, and I want to try and illustrate that with a few examples. These are just some notes that I'm putting together on this. So one of the things that we see is that the old-fashioned way in traditional architectures, we structure our application on what's this model view controller architecture. So in this server side of the equation here, we've got a model view controller. The model is the database, the view is the thing that generates the HTML, the controller is the application logic. All that is happening within the server. The browser's job is only to display that to the end user. But things get more complicated in this kind of a world, because really the server now is really just doing the job of delivering data. So in some ways, in one way to look at the server is it's really just the model part. It just provides data to the browser, and all of the other logic, the application logic, the controller if you like, and certainly the view logic is running in the browser. So it's not MVC any longer, it's not model view controller any longer, it's a more complicated model. I would just want to show a couple of examples to illustrate the way that these different applications are working, just to sort of show the different. These are very, very, very simple applications. So what I've got is a little web application that displays a list of cities. Now, if I would like to filter this list of cities, the old traditional way of doing that is to have a form, and I have a form here in my page, and if I want to say find all of the ones that begin with SY, I would fill that form out, I would submit that request, and let's have a look at the web developer tools here, and particularly the network tools. So I fulfill that and I submit my query. That will send a GET request off to the system with filter equals SY. The backend will do some work to filter the list. It will send back a new page then with the new content on it. So here I can see there's my request, here's my page. The response here is going to be the new page with only those things in it that I actually want to see, the filtered results, and I see the filtered results. If I want to do another request, then I filter, then I get another request, and so on. So each interaction with the form and the application involves a round trip to the server. Server does some work, we get the page back again and display it in here. And so that's the, if you like, the old-fashioned way of doing things. The modern way of doing things, the modern web application, and again this is just a very simple example, behaves quite a bit differently. So when we first refresh this page, what we get back is a page which contains basically nothing. If we look for the content of this page, if you look at the preview there of that page, as I saw it, you can see that it just has the filter form in it, and the HTML content there just has that filter form, and then where the list of cities should be, it's just got an empty list there of nothing. But what we do is we load a JavaScript file, and so the second request here you see is for, the second one is the favicon, but here is for the JavaScript file. And the JavaScript file then is going to do the work, and it's got a couple of functions defined. I won't go into the details there, but what it's doing is, the first thing it's doing is to populate this list. So it's going to then make a request to the browser, to the server, for the list of cities. So the list of cities is now coming back as a JSON payload, so you can see the format here at the bottom, that we're getting this list of cities back in JSON format, and there they are. And then the JavaScript will render that into the page so that we then see this page listed here. Now this application has this list of cities, and they're displayed in the page. But now what happens when I want to actually do the filtering is I can, there's a bug in my code, but I can type just the letter S, and you can see there are no more queries being sent. We've already got the data, that's the list here. We can filter that data and then redisplay without any backtrack, and it is much faster to do that than it is to do what we had previously. Okay, so we've got a very fast response time. We've got no more queries going back to the server. We are just dealing with the data in the browser and presenting it to the user. So this is illustrating the difference between these two architectural styles. We have the old-fashioned web architecture where I make new requests back to the server, does some work, comes back with a result, versus the new one where I send one request off for the data and then I do the work of filtering and processing the data in the browser, so that I can give a much more rapid kind of response to requests. So these are two quite different ways of thinking about browsers. The obvious advantages of this new way of doing things is that the interaction is much faster and we're making fewer requests, right? So for every query, every filter, we don't have to send a request back to the server. So our server is under less load. The front end is doing more work, but it is quite capable of doing that. So modern laptops have got lots of processing power, storage, and so on. They're quite capable of handling the kinds of data that we give them. So we can actually load up the browser with data, and we can make it do a lot of work in processing the page and generate interesting applications. So most applications now, most modern web applications that you look at will use this kind of way of working. They will be pages that are loaded with very little in them, and then JavaScript code that will actually fill out the page and potentially make requests to back-end servers for data to actually insert into the page. And we don't also need to be limited to a single back-end server. We can be making requests to lots of different back-end services to provide different bits of information. So I might go to Google for a map, I might go to another site for SoundCloud for an audio file, and so on, and use all of those components to present the result to my users. So this has been a bit of a look at the difference between the old and the new families of architectures of web applications. Thank you.